In the remote mountains of Mindoro Island in the Philippines, a mystery persists to this day. Local fishermen refuse to sail near certain shores after sunset. Villagers speak in hushed tones about strange lights dancing between mountain peaks on moonless nights. The distant sound of aircraft engines echoes where no planes fly. It is him, they whisper, the American who never left. What keeps the spirit of one man bound to these distant peaks 80 years after his death? What unfinished business tethers a soul to the site of its final battle? Today, we unravel the extraordinary true story of Major Thomas McGuire, a man who rose to become America's second highest scoring fighter pilot of World War II with 38 confirmed aerial victories. A man whose relentless pursuit of excellence led him to one fateful decision that would transform him from legendary pilot to eternal guardian of Mindoro's skies. This is not simply a war story. This is a journey into the mind of a warrior, the price of ambition, and the thin line between immortal glory and mortal limitations. Thomas McGuire was not born extraordinary. Raised in Ridgewood, New Jersey, he was described by childhood friends as quiet and studious. Nothing marked him for greatness until he discovered aviation. The first time he took control of an aircraft, witnesses said something changed in him, as if he had finally found his true element. By early 1944, McGuire had transformed into what the ancient Filipinos would have called a mandarigma salangit, a warrior of the skies. His aircraft of choice, the distinctive twin-boomed P-38 Lightning, one of the most formidable fighter planes of World War II. But a shadow loomed over McGuire's achievements. Another pilot named Richard Bong had claimed 40 victories, making him America's all-time ace of aces. McGuire, with 38 kills to his name, stood at the threshold of surpassing that record. That burning ambition would lead him to the mountains of Mindoro, where glory and tragedy awaited in equal measure. What made Thomas McGuire exceptional was not just his marksmanship or flying skill, but his analytical approach to aerial combat. While other pilots relied on instinct, McGuire studied enemy aircraft specifications, memorized their performance limitations, and developed counter-tactics for each Japanese fighter type. His fellow pilots described him as possessed of an almost supernatural situational awareness. In the chaotic three-dimensional chessboard of aerial combat, McGuire could anticipate movements 3 steps ahead. One wingman said, "Flying with McGuire was like flying with a man who could see the future." The P-38 Lightning was America's most distinctive fighter, twin-boom, with a central nacelle holding the pilot. Many pilots struggled to master its unique handling characteristics, but in McGuire's hands, the aircraft performed maneuvers others considered impossible. He developed what became known as the McGuire Method, a series of fighting techniques specifically tailored to the P-38's strengths. When other pilots complained about the aircraft's limitations, McGuire would respond, "The plane will do exactly what you ask of it. The question is whether you are asking for the right things." By December 1944, McGuire's victory count stood at 38, just 2 short of Richard Bong's record. The competition between these two American aces was never official, but was followed closely by newspapers back home. Both men publicly denied any rivalry, yet those who flew with them noted how each closely tracked the other's success. What few knew was that McGuire had begun taking increasingly bold risks. His squadron mates noticed the change. "He's flying different," one remarked after a mission, "like a man with a deadline." On December 25, 1944, Christmas Day, McGuire shot down 4 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement, an extraordinary feat that made headlines across America. In one day, he had closed the gap with Bong to just 2 victories. The next day, Richard Bong was rotated back to the United States, his combat tour complete. The path to becoming America's top ace now lay open before McGuire. All he needed was one more successful mission, 2 more victories, to cement his place in aviation history. On January 7, 1945, McGuire requested permission to lead a fighter sweep over Negros Island. The mission was approved. As he walked to his aircraft that morning, a fellow pilot called out, "Going hunting for the record today, Mac?" McGuire's response, recorded in his wingman's diary, would prove hauntingly prophetic. Records don't matter, only results. But something tells me today is special. What McGuire couldn't know was that he was flying toward a fateful encounter that would transform him from a historical footnote into a legend, though not in the way he intended. Dawn broke clear over the Philippines on January 7, 1940. McGuire led a flight of 4 P-38 Lightnings, himself and 3 wingmen, Major Jack Rittmeyer, Captain Edwin Weaver, and Lieutenant Douglas Thropp. Their mission, to hunt Japanese aircraft over Negros Island. At 10:30 that morning, McGuire's flight encountered exactly what they were searching for, a lone Japanese Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighter flying low over the jungle. The Japanese pilot was Technical Sergeant Akira Sugimoto, an experienced veteran with thousands of flight hours. What happened next has been analyzed by military historians for decades, trying to understand how one of America's greatest aces could fall to a seemingly routine engagement. McGuire ordered his flight to attack. As they descended toward the Japanese fighter, something unusual happened. Rather than evading, Sugimoto turned directly toward the American formation, a suicidal move against 4 heavily armed P-38s. Unless it was a deliberate tactic. Too late, McGuire realized the truth. The lone Japanese fighter was acting as bait. As the Americans descended, 2 additional Japanese fighters emerged from hiding in the sun's glare. A classic ambush tactic. In an instant, the hunters had become the hunted. McGuire found himself in a perilous position. Having dived to attack, his aircraft had lost altitude and energy, critical factors in aerial combat. The fight descended to treetop level, just 300 feet above the jungle canopy, leaving no room for error. As one of the Japanese fighters closed on Lieutenant Thropp's aircraft, McGuire made a fateful decision. Rather than climbing to safety, the textbook response, he turned his P-38 sharply to engage the Japanese fighter, attempting to draw fire away from his wingman. It was a decision that embodied the highest ideals of the combat leadership. It was also a decision that violated McGuire's own cardinal rule: never sacrifice energy advantage unnecessarily. At such low altitude, the P-38's turn radius required perfect execution. As McGuire's aircraft banked steeply, his left wing dropped fractionally too low. Witnesses described the moment with terrible clarity, the wingtip brushing the uppermost branches of the jungle canopy. In aerial combat, small errors cascade into catastrophic failures in milliseconds. The brief contact destabilized the aircraft, sending it into an unrecoverable roll. McGuire's P-38 cartwheeled into the dense jungle, erupting in a fireball visible to his circling wingmen. Thomas McGuire, with 38 aerial victories, second only to Richard Bong's 40, was gone in an instant, not through lack of skill, but through a combination of circumstance, split-second decision-making, and perhaps that burning desire to claim America's top ace title. His 3 wingmen survived the engagement, their lives likely saved by McGuire's final act of self-sacrifice. Days passed before a recovery team could reach the crash site. What they found added a strange footnote to the story. Despite the violent impact, McGuire's body remained seated in the cockpit position, hands positioned as if still gripping controls that had been torn away. Even in death, he remained the pilot, inseparable from his purpose. On March 8, 1945, President Roosevelt posthumously awarded Thomas McGuire the Medal of Honor America's highest military decoration for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. But the story of Thomas McGuire was far from over. In 1949, the Philippine government erected a memorial near the crash site on Negros Island. During the ceremony, several attendees reported unusual phenomena: compass needles spinning without explanation, camera equipment malfunctioning, and most strikingly, the sound of distant aircraft engines when no planes were in the area. In the decades since, the reports have continued. Local Filipino fishermen avoid certain areas after sunset, claiming that strange lights appear over the jungle where McGuire's aircraft went down. Hikers report cold spots where the temperature drops suddenly, accompanied by the scent of aviation fuel and the distant sound of propellers. In 1985, a team of American military historians visited the site to gather information for a book about McGuire. Their audio recording equipment captured unexplained sounds, what audio analysts later described as consistent with P-38 engines at idle power, despite no aircraft operating within 50 miles of their location. Most compelling are the consistent reports from separate witnesses who describe seeing the distinctive silhouette of a twin-boomed P-38 flying low over the mountains at dawn or dusk, especially on January 7th, the anniversary of McGuire's final flight. When investigated, no flight plans or aircraft matching that description can be found. Is Thomas McGuire still flying over Mindoro? Has his spirit remained, like the Anito of Filipino tradition, watching over the mountains where he fell? Or are these merely legends born from respect for a fallen warrior? The evidence remains inconclusive, but the persistence of these sightings across 8 decades suggests something unusual about this particular place and this particular pilot. The Filipino people had endured 3 years of brutal Japanese occupation. Their indigenous spiritual traditions held that warriors who died in pursuit of freedom became Anito, protective ancestral spirits who remained to watch over sacred lands. Unknown to Thomas McGuire, he would join their ranks in a way neither he nor his commanders could have imagined. Perhaps what keeps Thomas McGuire's spirit tied to those distant mountains is not unfinished ambition, but the eternal essence of the protector, forever watching over the skies he fought to free. As night falls over Mindoro Island, locals still glance skyward at the sound of distant engines. Sometimes, against the fading light, they glimpse the unmistakable silhouette of a twin-boomed fighter plane, banking sharply between mountain peaks before disappearing into the gathering darkness. The ghost pilot of Mindoro continues his eternal flight, a reminder that some warriors never truly leave their battlefields, and some stories never truly end.